In Coldwater Maximum Security Prison, a black inmate was about to challenge the brutal order upheld by the white prison guards. What started as a routine cell inspection spiraled when Sergeant Eli Warren decided to make an example of someone. Dante "Ghost" Caldwell wasn't your typical inmate. For 7 years, he had endured the unrelenting brutality of Coldwater, known for his quiet defiance and unshakable will. Unlike the others who averted their gaze, Ghost met Warren's eyes without fear, and that, more than anything, made Warren's blood boil. When Warren ordered a false contraband search, then used it as an excuse to drag Ghost into the yard for a public beating, he had no idea he was setting off something far greater than fear. Ghost didn't beg. He didn't break. He just watched, memorizing the weight behind every strike, the growing unease in the faces of the inmates forced to witness it. What began as one man's unchecked power would become Coldwater's reckoning. The prison would never forget the day Sergeant Warren finally met a man he couldn't break. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of Sergeant Eli Warren's boots against the concrete floor announced his presence before he rounded the corner. The rhythmic click-clack echoed through the cell block, a sound that made most inmates shrink back into the shadows of their cells. 20 years at Coldwater Maximum Security had taught Warren how to walk. Heel first, slow and deliberate, a predator's gait. Well, Warren drawled, coming to a stop outside cell 217. Look who thinks the rules don't apply to him. Today, Dante Caldwell, known as Ghost to everyone inside these walls, stood with his back straight, eyes forward, hands at his sides. Not at attention like the other inmates, who stood with their eyes down and hands behind their backs whenever an officer approached. Ghost stood like a man, and that, more than anything, made Warren's blood simmer. "I said hands behind your back, Caldwell." Warren's voice carried down the tier. The other guards stiffened, recognizing the tone. The inmates went silent. Ghost met Warren's gaze. "I heard you, sir." A beat passed between them. Ghost's hands remained at his sides. Warren's lips curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile, if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Cuff him," he ordered, and 2 junior officers rushed forward, roughly pulling Ghost's arms behind his back. "Cell search, Caldwell, step out." Warren stepped aside, watching as Ghost was pulled from the cell. Funny thing about contraband, seems to show up in the cells of inmates who forget their place. Officer Ryan Lasky, 3 weeks into his first assignment at Coldwater, stood at the end of the tier. He watched as Warren nodded to another guard who slipped into Ghost's cell. Even from a distance, Lasky could see the man plant something under the thin mattress. "Well, would you look at that?" Warren announced, loud enough for the entire block to hear. The guard emerged, holding up a crude shank fashioned from a piece of metal. "Dangerous weapon in your possession, Caldwell. That's a serious offense." Ghost's expression remained neutral, but his eyes never left Warren's. "That's not mine, sir, and we both know it." Warren stepped closer, close enough that only Ghost could hear his next words. "Doesn't much matter what we know, does it? What matters is what I say happened." He raised his voice again. "Take him to the yard. I think our friend needs a lesson in respect." Lasky followed at a distance as Ghost was marched through the prison. Word spread quickly. Warren was making an example of someone. By the time they reached the yard, inmates had been assembled in groups around the perimeter, guards ensuring they stayed in place to watch what was about to happen. In the center of the yard, Ghost was forced to his knees, still in cuffs. Warren circled him slowly. "At Coldwater we have rules," Warren announced, addressing the gathered inmates. "Rules that keep you animals from tearing each other apart. Rules that keep my officers safe." He stopped in front of Ghost. "And when those rules are broken, there are consequences." The first blow came without warning, a baton to Ghost's ribs that made him double over. Warren nodded and the guard stepped back, giving him room. "See, I've been watching you, Caldwell," Warren said, striking again, this time across Ghost's shoulders. "Walking around like you're somebody, like you deserve respect." Another blow, harder. "But you're nothing. Just another criminal who forgot his place. Ghost stayed silent, even as Warren landed blow after blow. His eyes remained open, fixed, on Warren's face. Not pleading, not hateful. Just watching, memorizing. From his position at the edge of the yard, Lasky felt his stomach twist. This wasn't proper procedure. This wasn't even punishment. This was torture, public and deliberate. He glanced at the other guards. Some looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others watched with the detached interest of men who had seen this before and would see it again. "Sir," Lasky started, stepping forward. "Maybe we should—" "Stay in your lane, rookie," snapped Travis Boone, a veteran officer in Warren's right hand. "This is how it's done here." In the stands, Malik Red Thompson leaned forward, watching the display with calculated interest. Unlike the other inmates who stared in silent horror or looked away, Red seemed almost amused. His eyes darted between Ghost, still on his knees, and the other inmates, gauging reactions. Warren paused, breathing heavily. Ghost was still conscious, blood trickling from his mouth, but he hadn't made a sound, hadn't begged, hadn't broken. "Nothing to say, Caldwell?" Warren asked, grabbing Ghost by the chin, forcing eye contact. No apologies, no promises to do better. Ghost's voice came out as a rasp, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "I see you." Warren's expression shifted, just slightly. Something like uncertainty flashed across his face before hardening into rage. He struck again, harder this time, and again, and again. "Enough!" The voice came from behind them. Captain Henry Slade, the warden, approached with a slow, deliberate walk. "I think the point has been made, Sergeant Warren." Warren straightened, baton still in hand. "Just ensuring prisoner compliance, sir." Slade's cold eyes took in the scene. Ghost on the ground, bloodied but conscious. The inmates watching in silence, the guards maintaining the perimeter. He checked his watch. "Take him to solitary. 72 hours should cool him off." Slade turned to leave, then added almost as an afterthought, "And file the appropriate paperwork this time, Warren. I don't want any questions about procedure." As Ghost was dragged away, he locked eyes with Warren one final time. There was something in that look. Not submission, not even hate. Something else. Something that made Warren's grip on the baton tighten. Lasky watched as Ghost was half-carried toward the isolation wing. The inmates were being herded back to their cells, the show over. But the energy in the yard had changed. Something had shifted. First time seeing the real Coldwater. "Rookie?" Boone asked, clapping a heavy hand on Lasky's shoulder. "Is it always like this?" Lasky asked, unable to keep the disgust from his voice. Boone laughed. "Warren's been keeping these animals in line for 2 decades. You got a problem with his methods. You won't last a month." He leaned closer. "There's us and there's them. Don't ever forget which side you're on." As the yard emptied, Red lingered, watching Warren clean blood from his baton. A slow smile spread across his face as he was finally ushered inside. In the isolation wing, Ghost lay on the cold concrete floor of his cell. His ribs screamed with every breath, his face swollen and throbbing. But in the darkness, alone, he allowed himself a small, painful smile. Warren might think he'd won today, might think he'd broken another defiant inmate. But Ghost knew better. He'd seen the flash of fear in Warren's eyes just for a moment, seen the uncertainty. And in a place like Coldwater, uncertainty was weakness. Weakness was blood in the water, and the sharks were circling. Officer Ryan Lasky's hands trembled as he sat in the dim light of his apartment, laptop open before him. 3 hours past midnight, and sleep remained a distant possibility. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ghost's bloodied face, heard the sickening thud of Warren's baton against flesh and bone. The bottle of Jack beside him was half empty. It hadn't helped. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, rubbing his eyes. His finger hovered over the keyboard. What he was considering wasn't just career suicide, it was possibly criminal. But then again, so was what he'd witnessed in that yard. Lasky logged into the prison's remote security system, using the credentials he'd been issued during training. He navigated to the previous day's footage, yard camera 6. The system asked for his badge ID to authorize the viewing. He hesitated. Every access was logged. His name would be attached to this. "Fuck it," he muttered, entering his badge number. The footage was worse than his memory. The high-definition security camera captured everything in stark, unforgiving detail. Ghost's expressionless face as Warren circled him. The first blow. The second. The 10th. Blood spattering on concrete. Other guards watching, some looking away, none intervening. The inmates forced to witness what happened to those who defied the unspoken hierarchy of Coldwater. Lasky downloaded the file, hands still shaking. He navigated to a secure email service he'd created earlier that night, one not connected to his name. He'd found the address for Justine Pelletier, a prison reform activist who'd been vocal about conditions in southern prisons, particularly those with racial disparities in treatment. He attached the file. Hesitated again. The email was brief. "This footage is from Coldwater Maximum Security Prison, taken yesterday. The inmate being beaten is Dante Caldwell. The officer is Sergeant Eli Warren. This isn't an isolated incident. It's how things are done at Coldwater. I can't say who I am. Someone needs to see this." Before he could reconsider, Lasky hit send. The relief was immediate and sickening, like vomiting after hours of nausea. What was done was done. No taking it back now. In the pre-dawn darkness of Coldwater's isolation wing, Ghost lay motionless on his thin mattress, cataloging his injuries. 3 cracked ribs at minimum, his left eye swollen completely shut, a split lip that had finally stopped bleeding. Pain that radiated from so many points it was difficult to identify separate sources. He'd been in solitary before. The silence, the disorientation, the crushing loneliness, these were familiar demons. But something felt different this time. He couldn't place it, but his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive for 7 years inside these walls, were humming with alertness. The sound of the observation slot sliding open broke the silence. Ghost didn't move, didn't open his eyes. "Medical check." The voice belonged to Davis, one of the younger guards assigned to the isolation wing. There was something off in his tone. Tension, maybe. Uncertainty. Ghost said nothing. "Caldwell, you need to acknowledge the medical check." Ghost opened his right eye, regarding the guard silently. Davis swallowed visibly. You need anything? Water? Pain meds?" This was not protocol. Pain management in solitary consisted of ibuprofen if you were lucky, nothing if you weren't. And Davis looked nervous. "I'm fine," Ghost replied, his voice a rasp. Davis nodded too quickly. "Right, sure." He hesitated. "Warren's on his way down, just so you know." The slot slid shut before Ghost could respond. Ghost sat up slowly, ignoring the screaming protest from his ribs. Davis had never warned him about anything before. Something had shifted in the hours since he'd been thrown in here. Something significant enough to make a guard risk showing sympathy to an inmate. Sergeant Eli Warren strode through the administrative wing of Coldwater, his uniform pressed, his boots polished to a shine. The morning had started as any other, briefing the incoming shift, assigning posts, reminding his officers who was in charge. He'd planned to visit Ghost in isolation later. Not for any official reason, just to reinforce yesterday's lesson. Sometimes pain alone wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to remind them that the pain could always return, at your whim, at your convenience. His radio crackled to life. "Sergeant Warren, report to the warden's office immediately." Warren frowned, changing direction. The warden rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations. That was what Warren was for, handling the mess so Slade could focus on budgets and politics and keeping the state board satisfied. As he approached the administration building, Warren noticed officers watching him, their expressions unreadable. Jenkins and Morales, usually quick with a greeting, suddenly found paperwork that required their full attention as he passed. Reached Slade's office and knocked sharply. "Enter." Warren stepped inside, surprised to find Slade wasn't alone. Deputy Warden Richards was there, along with Gloria Martinez from Human Resources. "Sir," Warren said, standing at ease. "You wanted to see me?" Slade gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Warren." Warren remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." "Sit down." Slade's voice carried an edge Warren had rarely heard directed at him. Warren sat, a knot forming in his stomach. Slade turned his laptop around. On the screen was a paused video, the yard yesterday's lesson with Ghost. Warren's face filling the frame as he brought the baton down. "Would you care to explain this?" Slade asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Inmate discipline, sir. Caldwell was found with a shank. Resisted officers. The situation required force." "Required force," Slade repeated. 15 minutes worth of force, with the entire prison population watching? Warren shifted in his seat. "Sometimes an example needs to be made." Slade's hand came down hard on his desk. "An example? Do you have any idea what's happening right now?" He turned to Richards. "Tell him." Richards cleared his throat. "The video has gone viral. It's on every major news network. Social media is exploding. Here's Coldwater brutality is trending nationwide." Warren felt the blood drain from his face. "What video?" "This video," Slade said, turning the laptop back around. "Someone leaked the security footage. 10 million views and counting. The governor called me personally this morning. The Justice Department is sending investigators. The ACLU is filing emergency motions, and I have reporters camped outside my gates." Warren struggled to process this. "Sir, I was just maintaining order. You were torturing an inmate on camera." Slade stood, his composure finally breaking. "While other inmates watched, while guards stood by, do you have any concept of the shitstorm you've created?" Warren felt a strange sensation spreading through his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. Fear. "I'll handle the press, sir. Explain the security concerns. The necessity." "You won't be handling anything." Slade cut him off. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation." Warren stood abruptly. "You can't do that. I run security in this prison. Without me, without you, we might have a chance of containing this disaster," Slade said. "Your badge and your weapon now." Warren stared at the extended hand, unable to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't possible. Not at Coldwater, not to him. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "we've dealt with problems before. Inmate complaints. Outside pressure. We've always handled it internally." Slade's expression was stone. "This isn't an inmate complaint, Warren. This is video evidence of prisoner abuse broadcast to the entire country. Martinez will escort you out. Stay available. You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs, and probably the FBI." Warren unclipped his badge with numb fingers, unholstered his weapon. 20 years of authority, stripped away in seconds. "Sir," he tried one last time, "the inmates will see this as weakness, without me to keep them in line." "Get out of my prison, Warren," Slade said, turning away, "before I have you escorted out." In the isolation wing, Ghost heard the heavy door at the end of the corridor swing open, the familiar sound of Warren's. Boots approached his cell, but the rhythm was off, faster, uneven. Not the deliberate pace of a predator, but the hurried steps of a man with somewhere to be. The observation slot slid open, and Warren's face appeared. His expression was different, tight, controlled, but with something new behind the eyes. "This isn't over, Caldwell," Warren said, his voice low. "Whatever you think is happening, whatever you think you've won, remember who I am. Remember what I can do." Ghost said nothing, simply held Warren's gaze. Warren's radio crackled. "Warren, Martinez is waiting at the main entrance." Warren's jaw clenched. He stared at Ghost for one more moment, then slammed the slot shut. As Warren's footsteps receded, Ghost allowed himself a small smile. He didn't know what had happened, didn't know what had changed, but he recognized the sound of a man running out of time. Back in his apartment, Lasky stared at his phone in disbelief. The video had spread faster than he could have imagined. Justice for Ghost was trending. News anchors were saying Dante Caldwell's name. Prison reform activists were organizing protests. His phone rang, Officer Jenkins from the morning shift. Lasky, are you seeing this? It's fucking chaos here. Warren's been suspended. State investigators are on their way. Slade's losing his mind. Lasky felt dizzy with the weight of what he'd done. Is Caldwell okay? Ghost, I mean. Still in solitary, far as I know. But everything's different now. The inmates know something's up. They can feel it. Jenkins lowered his voice. Listen, there's going to be a search for whoever leaked that footage. They're pulling access logs right now. Lasky's heart hammered in his chest. They can trace it? Every view of security footage is logged by badge number. Just be careful, man. This place is changing by the hour. After hanging up, Lasky sat in silence, the magnitude of his actions sinking in. He'd meant to expose one incident, one corrupt guard, but he'd struck a match in a room full of gasoline, and Coldwater was about to burn. The world outside Eli Warren's apartment seemed impossibly bright, impossibly loud. 3 days had passed since his suspension, and he'd barely left his living room. Empty whiskey bottles lined the coffee table. The television played endlessly, news channels dissecting the Coldwater footage frame by frame, activists demanding reforms, politicians expressing outrage over disturbing and unacceptable conditions. His phone rang for the 12th time that morning. He let it go to voicemail like all the others. Warren, it's Boone. Situation's deteriorating at Coldwater. Slade's caving to outside pressure. They're releasing Caldwell from solitary today. Some bullshit about medical concerns. We need to talk. Call me back. Warren stared at the phone, unable to summon the energy to return the call. 20 years he'd given to Coldwater. 20 years maintaining order, keeping the animals in their cages, protecting the guards who couldn't protect themselves. And now, what? Thrown to the wolves for doing his job? His doorbell rang. Warren ignored it, but the visitor was persistent, pressing the button in a steady rhythm. With a groan, he hauled himself up, stumbling slightly as he made his way to the door. Captain Henry Slade stood on his porch dressed in civilian clothes, sunglasses hiding his eyes. You look like shit, Slade said, pushing past Warren into the apartment. He surveyed the mess, the bottles, the unwashed dishes, the rumpled uniform, thrown over a chair. Jesus, Warren, pull yourself together. Warren closed the door. What do you want? To make sure you haven't done anything stupid, and to tell you how this is going to play out. Slade removed his sunglasses, fixing Warren with a cold stare. The investigators arrive tomorrow. They're going to want your side of the story. And what is my side exactly? Warren's voice was rough from disuse and whiskey. That you were responding to a security threat. That Caldwell had a history of violent behavior. That the force used, while regrettable in hindsight, felt necessary in the moment. Warren laughed bitterly. You want me to apologize? I want you to survive this, Slade snapped. The video doesn't have audio. They don't know what Caldwell said to you. They don't know the context. Play this right, and you might keep your pension. Play it wrong, and you'll be facing criminal charges. Warren stared at his former boss. This isn't about protecting me. This is about protecting you, and Coldwater. It's about containing the damage, Slade corrected. To the institution, to the system, and yes, to me. But it could work in your favor, if you're smart. And if I'm not? Slade put his sunglasses back on. Then you'll be the sacrifice that satisfies the mob. Your choice. He moved to the door. Clean yourself up, answer your phone, and remember, this isn't personal, it's just business. When Slade was gone, Warren stood in the silence of his apartment, feeling something unfamiliar take root in his chest. For 20 years, he'd been the one with power, the one who decided fates. Now, for the first time, He understood what it meant to be on the other side, to be at the mercy of a system that cared nothing for justice, only for self-preservation. Within the concrete walls of Coldwater, a different kind of power shift was underway. Travis Boone prowled the officers' locker room, voice low but intense. They want us to roll over. Pretend we're the bad guys for keeping order in a maximum security prison filled with murderers and rapists. 5 other guards listened, nodding. These were Warren's men, officers who shared his view of Coldwater, of the inmates, of what it took to maintain control. Warren did what any of us would have done, Boone continued. What any of us have done, and they're hanging him out to dry because some bleeding heart rookie couldn't handle the reality of this place. You think it was Lasky? Officer Mendez asked. Who else accessed the footage? Who else looked sick during the whole thing? Boone's expression darkened. I checked the logs. His badge number pulled the video at 3:17 a.m. By 6 a.m. it was on the news. Officer Collins shook his head. What's the plan then? We can't just let them steamroll Warren. We remind everyone who really runs this prison, Boone said. The suits can make their statements. The investigators can file their reports. But in here, in the trenches, we're the ones keeping civilization alive, and we stick together. And Caldwell? Mendez asked. Boone's smile was cold. Ghost? He's not untouchable. Neither are his friends. They just need to understand that Warren may be gone, but the system he built isn't. Not yet. In the medical wing, Dante Ghost Caldwell sat still as a prison doctor examined his ribs. The doctor, an older man with tired eyes, pressed gently against Ghost's side, noting his wince. 3 fractured ribs, the doctor confirmed. Some deep tissue bruising. The eye's better, but you'll want to take it easy. Ghost said nothing. He'd spent most of his 3 days in solitary, drifting in and out of consciousness, pain and hunger blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. The sudden transfer to medical, the careful examination, the promise of return to general population, these changes made no sense within Coldwater's usual order. The doctor sighed, lowering his voice. Listen, things are different now. That video, it's changed things. There are investigators coming, journalists, they'll want to talk to you. Ghost studied the man's face. Why are you telling me this? Because I've worked here 15 years, seen what Warren and his people do, patched up the results. He looked away. And I've stayed quiet, so have a lot of others. Ghost's expression remained neutral, but he filed this information away. The doctor's shame was useful. A crack in the wall of institutional silence that had protected Warren for so long. You're cleared to return to general population, the doctor said louder now for the guard waiting outside. Take these for the pain. Come back in a week for a follow-up. The walk back to his cell block felt surreal. Guards who would normally bark orders or shove inmates aside stood at a distance, their expressions unreadable. Inmates watched Ghost pass, their gazes lingering. Some nodded slightly. Others simply stared. As he entered C Block, a subtle change rippled through the common area. Conversations paused. Men straightened. And then, from somewhere in the back, a slow, deliberate clapping began. One pair of hands, then another, then more, until the sound filled the space. Ghost kept walking, not acknowledging the reception but acutely aware of its significance. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had become something else in their eyes. A symbol. A catalyst. He reached his cell to find Malik Red Thompson, lounging on the bottom bunk, his bunk. Well, Red drawled, not moving. The man of the hour returns. Ghost stood in the doorway. You're in my bunk. Red smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. Just keeping it warm for you, Ghost. Wanted to be the first to welcome you back to the land of the living. He swung his legs off the bed, standing with exaggerated slowness. Things have changed while you were away. I can see that. Red moved closer, lowering his voice. You're the man now. Everyone saw what Warren did to you. Everyone saw you take it without breaking. And now Warren's gone, and you're back. Warren's suspended, Ghost corrected. Not gone. Same thing. His power's broken, and there's a vacuum now. Red's eyes gleamed with excitement, with possibility. The guards are divided, some backing Boone, others distancing themselves. The administration's in panic mode. And us, the inmates, we're watching, waiting. Ghost said nothing. Don't you see? Red pressed. This is our chance. Not just to get back at Warren, but to burn the whole system down. Coldwater, the guards, all of it. Ghost finally met Red's gaze. And then what? The question seemed to take Red by surprise. What do you mean? After the burning, what comes next? Red shrugged. Who cares? Sometimes you need to destroy before you can rebuild. And some things don't deserve to be rebuilt at all. Ghost moved past Red, reclaiming his space. I need to rest. Red laughed softly. Rest all you want, Ghost, but don't wait too long to pick a side. Things are moving fast now. He paused at the cell door. By the way, your little friend Lasky, the rookie guard who was there that day. Word is, he's the one who leaked the video. Ghost kept his expression carefully neutral. Is that right? Boone's boys are out for blood. If they confirm it was him... Red made a cutting motion across his throat. Just another part of the old system that needs burning, right? After Red left, Ghost sat on his bunk, mind working. The landscape had shifted dramatically in just 3 days. Old alliances fracturing, new ones forming. The careful balance of power that had defined Coldwater for years was dissolving, creating something unpredictable, volatile. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Officer Lasky, a young guard who'd made a choice that had set everything in motion. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the guard's break room, Ryan Lasky tried to keep his hands steady as he poured coffee. Every conversation stopped when he entered. Every pair of eyes tracked his movements. The divide was palpable. Some guards looked at him with disgust, others with something close to respect. Officer Davis, who ran the isolation wing, approached quietly. Rough shift? Lasky nodded, keeping his voice low. Boone had me reassigned to laundry detail, said it was for my own protection. He knows, Davis murmured. Doesn't have proof yet, but he knows. What about you? Lasky asked. You made your choice yet? Davis looked around the room, at the clear division forming among the staff. I've been here 8 years, seen things that keep me up at night, done things I'm not proud of because that's just how it was done. He met Lasky's gaze. But I've got 3 kids at home, a mortgage. I can't afford principals. Nobody can afford principals, Lasky said, until they can't afford not to have them. The older guard nodded slowly. Just watch your back. Boone's gathering his supporters, and Warren built a system here. Systems don't die easily. As Davis walked away, Lasky felt the weight of invisible crosshairs on his back. He'd known there would be consequences when he leaked the video. He just hadn't realized how quickly they would come, or from how many directions. His phone vibrated, in his pocket. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Your badge number accessed the footage at 3:17 a.m. Logs don't lie. Choose your next move carefully. Lasky deleted the message, his mouth dry. The walls were closing in. Evening fell on Coldwater like a shroud. In the yard, inmates gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. The guards patrolled in pairs, now tension evident in their posture. Ghost sat alone, watching the patterns, the shifting alliances. Red held court near the weight pile, his followers growing by the hour. Other inmate leaders kept their distance, wary of the rising temperature, of Red's increasing calls for action. Quite the hero's welcome you got today, a voice said behind him. Ghost didn't turn around. I'm not a hero, Johnson. Terrell Johnson, an older inmate serving his 25th year, sat down beside Ghost. Maybe not, but you're a symbol now, and symbols are powerful things. Symbols get used, Ghost replied, by people with agendas. Johnson watched Red's animated gestures, the growing circle around him. Red's pushing for a riot, saying it's time to tear Coldwater down brick by brick. Red's always wanted to watch the world burn. True enough, but this time he might get his wish. Johnson's weathered face was serious. The young ones are listening to him. They see Warren's suspension as weakness. They think the system's vulnerable. It is vulnerable, Ghost said. But vulnerability doesn't equal victory. Johnson studied Ghost carefully. What's your play here, then? You're the one Warren tortured. You're the face of this whole thing. People are looking to you now. Ghost was silent for a long moment. Warren's just one man. Removing him doesn't change the system that created him, that protected him. So you're with Red? Burn it all down? No. Ghost finally met the older man's gaze. Burning doesn't build anything. It just creates space for something new to grow. And without a plan for what that something is. He shook his head. We'll just end up with another Warren, another Coldwater. Johnson nodded slowly. You're going to need to make that position clear soon. Red's people are getting impatient, and Boone's guards are looking for any excuse to crack down. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Officer Boone appeared at the yard entrance, flanked by 4 other guards. His gaze swept the yard, lingering on Ghost. Speak of the devil, Johnson murmured. He's not Warren, Ghost said, but he wants to be. Boone strode directly to where Ghost and Johnson sat. Visitation for you, Caldwell, special request. Ghost stood, aware that every eye in the yard was now on this interaction. From who? State investigators, Boone said, loud enough for nearby inmates to hear. Seems like you're a real celebrity now. The undercurrent in Boone's voice was clear. Traitor, snitch, problem. Hands, Boone ordered, holding out cuffs. Ghost extended his wrists, his face impassive. The cuffs snapped closed, tighter than necessary. As Boone led him toward the administration building, Ghost noted the gathering tension in the yard behind them. Red had moved to the fence, watching Ghost's departure with narrowed eyes. Other inmates were drifting toward him, drawn by the gravity of impending conflict. Your friend Red's getting bold, Boone said, his grip tight on Ghost's arm. Talking about revolution, about taking over Coldwater. Ghost said nothing. You think Warren was bad? Boone continued. Warren at least had rules, had lines he wouldn't cross. But if this place erupts... He leaned closer. If there's a riot, there won't be any cameras, no audience, just us and them. And in that world, which side do you think comes out on top? Ghost met Boone's gaze evenly. Depends on what you're counting as a win. Boone's expression hardened. You think you've changed something because Warren's suspended? Because some bleeding heart investigators are asking questions? This is still Coldwater. The order Warren built, that I helped build, doesn't disappear overnight. They reached the administration building and Boone stopped, checking that they were alone. This little moment of yours, this fame, it won't last. When the cameras leave, when the politicians move on to the next crisis, it'll be just us again. And we have long memories. Ghost looked past Boone, toward the yard where Red continued gathering his followers. So do we. Boone followed his gaze, noticing the growing crowd around Red. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. This doesn't end well for anyone, Ghost said quietly. Not for me. Not for you. Not for Coldwater. Boone pushed him through the door. We'll see about that. In the administration conference room, 2 investigators from the Justice Department waited. As the door closed behind him, Ghost felt the strangest sensation, as if he were standing in 2 worlds, simultaneously. Here, in this room, was the promise of accountability, of outside intervention. But back in the yard, in the cell blocks, in the hidden corners of Coldwater, a different kind of justice was brewing. And soon, everyone would have to choose which version they believed in. The Justice Department investigators left Coldwater just as the afternoon sun began its descent, their sleek government cars kicking up dust that lingered in the humid air. Ghost watched from the window of the administration building as they departed, their faces grim with what they'd learned during hours of interviews. "They're coming back tomorrow," Captain Slade said from behind him. "With more people, more questions." Ghost turned. The warden looked exhausted, the careful polish of authority beginning to wear thin. "You told them what they wanted to hear," Ghost said. "It wasn't a question." Slade's jaw tightened. "I told them the truth. Your version of it. The only version that matters." Slade stepped closer. "Let me be clear, Caldwell. This investigation doesn't make us friends. It doesn't change what you are, or what Coldwater is." Ghost studied the man who'd run this prison for nearly a decade, who'd turned a blind eye to Warren's methods as long as they maintained order. "What exactly is Coldwater, Captain?" Slade wasn't prepared for the question. He blinked, searching for the rehearsed answer, the official line. "It's a correctional facility," he finally said, "for the worst offenders." "It's a pressure cooker," Ghost countered. "Always has been. Warren was just the hand on the valve, keeping it from exploding. Now he's gone and the pressure's building." Slade's expression darkened. "Is that a threat?" "It's reality. Your reality now." Ghost nodded toward the yard, visible through another window. Inmates were gathered in clusters, the usual divisions blurring as a new order took shape. Red's gathering supporters, the younger inmates, the ones with nothing to lose. They see weakness in the system now. "And you? What do you see?" Ghost met Slade's gaze evenly. "Opportunity. For revenge? For change." Ghost turned back to the window. "But change can come in different ways, some more painful than others." Slade was silent for a moment, calculating. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, just making an observation." Ghost faced the warden again. "Warren built a system where force was the only language, where racial hierarchy was law. It worked, in its way, until it didn't. And you think you have a better system in mind?" Ghost shrugged. "I think if you want to prevent a riot, you might need allies on both sides of the bars, people who prefer conversation to confrontation." Slade's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "People like you. People who understand that peace requires compromise, not just submission." The walkie-talkie on Slade's belt crackled. "Captain, need you in A block, situation developing." Slade grabbed the radio. "On my way." He gave Ghost a final assessing look. "Officer Davis will escort you back to your cell. This conversation isn't over, Caldwell." As Slade hurried away, Ghost remained by the window watching the yard. Red had moved his gathering to the basketball court, his animated gestures visible even from a distance. Whatever he was planning, it was accelerating. Ghost felt the familiar weight of decision settling on him. Red wanted blood. Warren's, Boone's, any guard who'd participated in the old order. His vision was simple: destruction first, consequences later. But Ghost had seen where that road led, had watched uprisings turn to massacres, had witnessed the aftermath of riots, harsher conditions, stricter control, deeper division, the brief satisfaction of vengeance followed by years of reinforced oppression. There had to be another way. Officer Davis appeared in the doorway, his expression tense. "Time to go, Caldwell." As they walked through the administrative corridors toward C Block, Ghost noted the heightened security, extra guards at checkpoints, nervous glances exchanged. The atmosphere had shifted again, the tension ratcheting higher. "Red's planning something," Davis said quietly as they passed through a security gate. "Tonight, maybe tomorrow. Boone knows it. Everyone knows it." Ghost didn't respond. "Coldwater's on the edge, Ghost," Davis continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "If this place goes up, a lot of people die. Inmates, guards, doesn't matter." They reached C Block just as lockdown bells began to ring, 2 hours early. "Emergency lockdown," the loudspeaker announced. "All inmates return to cells immediately." Repeat. Emergency lockdown in effect. Davis unlocked Ghost's cell. Whatever you're going to do, he said, his eyes meeting Ghost's for a brief moment. Do it fast. Before Ghost could respond, Red appeared, slipping into the cell beside him. Davis hesitated, then locked the door behind them and moved on. Things are moving, Red said as soon as they were alone. His eyes gleamed with excitement, with purpose. The guards are scared. They know it's coming, but they don't know when. Don't know how. Ghost sat on his bunk. What exactly is coming, Red? Justice, Red replied, pacing the small space. Retribution. Revolution. He crouched in front of Ghost, lowering his voice. I've got 30 men ready right now. By tomorrow morning it'll be 50. Enough to take the yard, the mess hall. Enough to make a statement. A statement that gets how many killed? Red's expression hardened. Some things are worth dying for. And worth killing for? If necessary. Red stood, frustration evident in his posture. What did you think was going to happen, Ghost? That Warren would get fired, and suddenly Coldwater becomes a summer camp? That the system that allowed him to torture you, to torture all of us, would just apologize and change its ways? Ghost shook his head. No. But there's a difference between demanding change and ensuring destruction. Sometimes they're the same thing. Red moved closer, his voice urgent. Look, I need to know where you stand. The men respect you. After what happened, after what they all saw Warren do to you, they're looking to you. If you're with us, we're stronger. If you're not, the threat hung in the air between them. I want the same things you want, Red, Ghost said carefully. Accountability, justice, an end to what Warren built. But I've seen riots before. I've seen the blood, the bodies, and I've seen what comes after. More walls, more restrictions, more brutality. Justified by our actions. Red's expression was calculating. So you're against us. I'm for survival, for all of us. Ghost met Red's gaze. There are investigators here now. Media attention. Political pressure. We have leverage we've never had before. We can use that to force real change, not just destroy what exists. For a moment, doubt flickered across Red's face. Then it hardened into resolve. The time for talking is over, Ghost. You're either with us or you're in the way. He moved to the cell door. Tonight, after lights out, make your choice by then. After Red left, Ghost sat motionless, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Throughout Coldwater, similar conversations were happening. Inmates choosing sides, guards reinforcing alliances, everyone sensing the coming storm. In the officer's locker room, Ryan Lasky changed into his uniform with shaking hands. The earlier emergency lockdown had triggered a staff recall, all officers on duty, regardless of schedule. The locker room was tense, filled with hushed conversations and wary glances. Well, look who decided to show up, a voice drawled from behind him. Lasky turned to find Officer Travis Boone leaning against the wall, arms crossed. 4 other guards stood nearby, Warren loyalists all. Captain called everyone in, Lasky said, trying to keep his voice steady. Just following orders. Boone pushed off the wall, moving into Lasky's space. Speaking of following orders, funny thing about security footage access logs. They keep track of every view, every download. Badge numbers, timestamps, everything. Lasky's mouth went dry. Is that right? 3:17 a.m., the night before the footage leaked, Boone continued, his voice dangerously soft. Badge number 4591. That's you, isn't it, Lasky? The locker room had gone silent, other officers watching the confrontation unfold. I don't know what you're talking about, Lasky managed, closing his locker. Boone's hand shot out, slamming the locker shut inches from Lasky's face. You think you're some kind of hero? Leaking that footage, turning the world against us? Do you have any idea what you've done? Lasky tried to step away, but Boone grabbed his uniform collar, shoving him against the lockers. Warren's career is finished. His life is ruined. All because you couldn't handle the reality of what this place is. The reality? Lasky found his voice, found his courage. You mean the reality where you torture inmates for sport? Where you enforce your own racial hierarchy? That reality? Boone's face contorted with rage. He drew back his fist, but another voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Boone. Officer Davis stood in the doorway, flanked by several other guards. Not Warren's men, but veterans who'd seen enough over the years to question the old order. This isn't your business, Davis, Boone snarled. It is now, Davis replied. Captain wants all officers at the briefing room, now, no exceptions. Boone's grip on Lasky's collar tightened for a moment, then released. This isn't over, rookie, he whispered. Not by a long shot. As Boone and his supporters pushed past, Davis gave Lasky a significant look. You okay? Lasky nodded, trying to control his breathing. Thanks. Davis moved closer, keeping his voice low. The inmates are planning something. Tonight, maybe. Red's people, and Boone. He's looking for any excuse to crack down. Hard. Slade knows. Slade's trying to manage the investigators, the media. He's delegated security to Boone. Davis's expression was grim. It's a powder keg, Lasky. And if what Boone says is true about the footage, Lasky swallowed. He can't prove anything. He doesn't need to prove it to get you killed. Davis checked that they were alone. Some of us have been talking. Guards who've had enough of Warren's methods, of Boone's escalation. If things go bad tonight, which side will you be on? Davis met his gaze. The side that ends this with minimal bloodshed. You? Before Lasky could answer, the loudspeaker crackled. All officers report to the briefing room immediately. Repeat, all officers to the briefing room. Across town, in his darkened apartment, Eli Warren sat staring at his phone. 27 missed calls, 15 voicemails, dozens of text messages. Some from reporters seeking comment, some from old colleagues offering support, 3 from his ex-wife expressing a mix of concern and satisfaction at his downfall, and 1 from Travis Boone, things coming to a head. Red planning something tonight. I need your guidance, your authority. Call me. Warren's hand hovered over the phone. For a week, he'd been drowning his humiliation in whiskey, watching his career, his reputation, his life's work dissolve in the face of public outrage. The Justice Department was building a case. The media had labeled him a monster. The governor had called for criminal charges. But Boone was right. Coldwater was still his. The system he'd built, the loyalty he'd cultivated, the fear he'd instilled, these things didn't disappear overnight. If Red was planning action, if the prison was at risk, maybe this was his chance at redemption, at reclaiming some measure of control. His phone rang again. Boone. Warren answered, his voice rough from disuse. What's the situation? It's going down tonight, Boone replied without preamble. Red's gathering support, at least 40 inmates ready to move. Ghost is the wild card. He hasn't committed either way, but the others look to him. If he sides with Red... Ghost, Warren muttered, the name like acid on his tongue. He's the reason for all of this. We need you, Sergeant, Boone pressed. Slade's useless, more worried about optics than security. The investigators are breathing, down our necks. Half the guards are questioning the old protocols. Warren felt a familiar sensation stirring in his chest. Purpose, authority, control. What are you suggesting? Come back. Tonight. Unofficial, but present. Show the men that you haven't abandoned them, that the system still holds. Slade would never allow it. Slade doesn't need to know. Not until it's done. Warren considered the proposition. Return to Coldwater, to the place where his word had been law. Face Ghost again, remind everyone who really controlled the prison, regardless of suspensions or investigations. It was reckless, potentially career-ending if he still had a career to end. It was also the first thing that had made him feel alive in a week. I'll be there, Warren said. 1 hour. As dusk settled over Coldwater, Ghost sat on his bunk, watching the shadows lengthen across his cell. The lockdown remained in effect. No yard time, no showers, meals delivered to cells. The administrative response to brewing trouble was always the same: restrict movement, limit communication, increase surveillance. But it wouldn't be enough. Not this time. Through the bars, Ghost could see other inmates in their cells. Some paced like caged animals. Others sat in conspicuous stillness, conserving energy for what was to come. The air thrummed with anticipation, with the electricity that precedes violence. A note slid beneath his cell door, a small scrap of paper, folded tight. Ghost retrieved it, unfolding it carefully. Tonight, 11 p.m. After third count. Be ready. Our Ghost read the message twice, then dissolved the paper in his sink. Red had made his move, the board was set. All that remained was for Ghost to decide where he stood, with Red's violent uprising or against it, with the promise of retribution or the uncertain path of reform. In his mind, Ghost saw two futures unfolding. In one, Coldwater erupted in flames, inmates and guards locked in brutal combat, blood staining the concrete, bodies piling up as the state tactical unit inevitably stormed the prison. A brief moment of power, of revenge, followed by years of harsher control, deeper divisions. In the other, something different, something uncertain. A path where the pressure of outside scrutiny, of media attention, of political embarrassment, forced genuine change, where Ghost used his newfound influence not to destroy but to rebuild. Not perfect, not immediate, but sustainable. The light in his cell flickered, then dimmed as night fell on Coldwater. In the darkness, Ghost made his choice. Outside in the guard station overlooking C Block, Officer Lasky stood watch, his body tense with anticipation. Davis's words echoed in his mind. It's a powder keg. The radio at his hip crackled. All stations, be advised. Emergency response team on standby. Report any unusual activity immediately. Lasky acknowledged the message, then turned his attention back to the cells before him. In the dimness, he could just make out the silhouettes of inmates, some sleeping, others awake and alert despite the late hour. The door behind him opened. Shift change, a voice said. Lasky turned, expecting to see his relief. Instead, Travis Boone stood in the doorway, flanked by two other guards, Warren loyalists. And behind them, his face half hidden in shadow, was Sergeant Eli Warren himself. Warren stepped forward, his uniform wrinkled but still carrying the weight of authority. Hello, Lasky. We need to talk about security footage, about loyalty, about consequences. The door shut behind them with the finality of a prison cell being locked. In that moment, Lasky understood with perfect clarity that he was trapped, caught between Warren's vengeance and Red's revolution. With nowhere to run and no one to call for help, the night had only just begun. The darkness in the guard station was broken only by the soft glow of security monitors. Warren's face, half illuminated in the blue light, looked like something from a nightmare, familiar features twisted by rage and desperation. I always knew there was something wrong with you, Lasky, Warren said, his voice low. From the first day, something soft, something weak. Lasky backed against the console, eyes darting between Warren and the door where Boone and two other guards blocked any escape. Warren, you shouldn't be here. You're suspended. This is only going to make things worse. Warren smiled, a cold expression devoid of humor. Worse than having my career destroyed, my reputation ruined, my life's work erased? He moved closer. You know what I've been doing for the past week, Lasky? Sitting in my apartment, watching the news call me a monster, reading about how the heroic whistleblower exposed the systematic abuse at Coldwater. It was abuse, Lasky said, finding his courage. What you did to Ghost, to Caldwell, it was torture. And not just him. I've heard the stories, seen the evidence. Warren lunged forward, grabbing Lasky by the throat. You sanctimonious little shit. You have no idea what it takes to maintain order in a place like this. The line between civilization and chaos is thinner than you think. The overhead light suddenly flickered, then went out completely. Emergency backup lights kicked on, bathing the station in a dim red glow. Boone's radio crackled. "All stations, we have a power disruption in C block. Backup generators engaged. Stand by." Another voice cut through the static. "Section 4 reporting inmate disturbance. Multiple cells B block." And another. "Medical wing East corridor, inmates out of cells. Repeat, inmates out of cells." The uprising had begun. Warren released Lasky, turning to Boone. "It's coordinated. They're hitting multiple points simultaneously." His expression shifted from rage to focused determination. "How many response teams do we have?" "2 on standby," Boone replied. "Maybe 20 officers we can rely on." "Weapons? Batons, tasers, riot gear in the armory. No firearms, Slade's orders." Warren nodded. "Lock him in," he said, gesturing to Lasky. "Then get to the armory. Secure it at all costs. I'll coordinate from the central station." As Boone moved to restrain him, Lasky saw his opportunity. He lunged for the emergency button on the console, slamming it with his palm. Alarms blared throughout the facility, triggering automatic lockdown protocols. "You idiot!" Warren shouted over the noise. "Now every door in the administrative wing is sealed." "Including the armory," Lasky shot back. "No one gets weapons now." Warren's face contorted with fury. He grabbed Lasky again, this time throwing him against the wall with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. "When this is over," Warren snarled, "I'll make what happened to Ghost look like a caress." The door burst open. Officer Davis stood there with 3 other guards, none of them Warren loyalists. "What the hell is going on here?" Davis demanded, taking in the scene. His hand moved to his radio. "This is Davis. I've got Warren in C block guard station. Repeat, Warren is in the facility. Over." Warren released Lasky, turning to face the new threat. "You're making a mistake, Davis. Coldwater's under attack. This isn't the time for division." "Division," Davis echoed. "You created the division. You and your methods." He looked to the other guards. "Get Lasky out of here. I'll deal with Warren." And Boone. As they moved to help Lasky, the building shook with a distant explosion. Alarms wailed from multiple blocks. On the security monitors, chaos unfolded. Inmates pouring from cells, guards retreating, smoke billowing from somewhere deep in the facility. "It's too late," Warren said, a strange calm settling over him. "It's already begun." In C block, Ghost moved through the darkness with deliberate purpose. The power outage had triggered emergency release mechanisms on the electronic cell doors, a safety feature meant to prevent inmates from being trapped during a fire. Now, it served as the first phase of Red's plan. Inmates spilled into the common area, some confused, others with clear intent. Red's lieutenants moved among them, distributing crude weapons, shanks fashioned from metal scraps, socks weighted with locks, pieces of broken furniture. "Ghost!" Red's voice cut through the commotion. He approached, eyes gleaming with excitement, adrenaline. "It's happening just like we planned." He gestured to the chaos unfolding around them. Multiple blocks moving simultaneously. "We've got people at the main junction box, the communications center, the yard." Ghost surveyed the scene. "And the guards?" "Falling back to defensive positions. They weren't prepared for this scale." Red gripped Ghost's shoulder. "We're taking control." "Ghost, after all these years, Coldwater belongs to us." Ghost looked at the men gathering around them. Young inmates filled with rage, older ones with the haunted eyes of those who'd endured too much for too long. All looking to him, to Red, for direction, for leadership. "What's the plan?" Ghost asked, his voice carrying in the sudden hush. Red grinned. "Phase 1, secure the blocks. Phase 2, take the yard, the mess hall, any common areas. Phase 3, the administrative wing." His eyes hardened. "That's where we'll find Warren. Where we'll find Boone. Where we'll find justice." The word hung in the air, heavy with promise and threat. "Not justice," Ghost said, his voice low but clear. "Vengeance. There's a difference." Red's expression shifted. Is there? After what they've done to us? After what Warren did to you? Warren deserves punishment. Ghost agreed. So does Boone. So do all of them who abuse their power. He looked around at the gathered inmates. But if we become like them, if we torture, if we kill, then we're no better. Then we justify everything they've said about us. Everything they've done to us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others dissenting. Red's face darkened with anger. So what's your plan? Ask nicely for change? File another complaint that disappears into the system? My plan, Ghost said, is to force them to see us. Not as animals, not as numbers, but as men demanding justice under the law. He turned, addressing the gathering crowd directly. We have something we've never had before. The world's attention. Cameras outside these walls. Investigators documenting everything. Politicians scrambling to distance themselves from what Warren built. That doesn't mean shit, Red countered. The moment this is over, they'll lock us down harder than before. Nothing will change. Unless we make it impossible for them to return to the old ways. Ghost pointed toward the yard. We take the open spaces. We make our demands clear. We show discipline, organization, not random violence. We force them to negotiate, not just react. The crowd had grown, inmates from other blocks joining as the uprising spread. Ghost could feel the momentum shifting, the calculus of rebellion, changing as men considered his words. And Warren? Someone called out. Boone? The ones who hurt us? We hold them accountable, Ghost replied. We make sure they face real justice, trials, testimony, evidence, the kind of justice they denied us. Red stepped forward, his patience exhausted. Enough talk, we didn't start this to hold a debate. He turned to his closest followers. Secure the yard. Find Warren. Bring him to me. As men began to move, Ghost made his decision. He stepped into Red's path, voice cutting through the chaotic energy. Red's right about one thing, he called out. This isn't a debate. It's a choice between being the monsters they always said we were or being the men they refused to see. He pointed to the security cameras that lined the walls. Every move we make tonight is being recorded, will be seen by the world outside. What do we want them to see? Animals rampaging or men standing for justice? A heavy silence fell. Red's expression was murderous, but even he recognized the shift in the room. Ghost had tapped into something deeper than rage, a desire for dignity that even years of brutalization hadn't extinguished. Take the yard, Ghost continued. Take the open spaces, show discipline, no unnecessary violence, no revenge killings. His gaze found Red's. Warren, Boone, they face justice. Real justice, not lynching. For a moment it seemed Red might challenge him openly. Then with a cold smile he nodded. The yard. Then we'll discuss terms with our friend Sergeant Warren. As the crowd surged toward the yard, Red leaned close to Ghost. This better work, because if it fails, if they crush us because we weren't willing to do what's necessary, that's on you, Ghost held his gaze. And if we become what Warren made us, that's on all of us. Warden Henry Slade stood in the central control room, watching in disbelief as his prison descended into chaos. Multiple security feeds showed inmates controlling entire sections of Coldwater. The yard was lost. So was the mess hall, the eastern administrative wing. How the hell did this happen? He demanded of no one in particular. A harried deputy handed him the latest report. Multiple coordinated actions, power cut to cell blocks triggering emergency releases, communications disrupted. They knew exactly where to hit us, when to hit us. Casualties? 3 guards injured, none critical. No confirmed inmate injuries yet. Yet, Slade repeated, grimly. Where's our tactical response? State team is 30 minutes out, local police establishing perimeter. Slade turned back to the monitors. And the media? The deputy hesitated. Already outside the gates. Somehow they knew before it started. Of course they did. They'd been camped outside for days, following the Warren scandal. Now they had front row seats to the consequences. The door burst open. Officer Davis entered, supporting a battered Lasky. "Sir, we have a situation. Warren's in the facility." Boone let him in. They were about to assault Officer Lasky when the riot broke out. Slade's face went ashen. "Warren? Here? Tonight?" The implications crashed over him. Does he have any idea what he's done, what this looks like? He doesn't care what it looks like, Lasky said, wincing as he straightened. He wants control back, at any cost. Slade turned back to the monitors, finding the one showing the yard. Hundreds of inmates had gathered there, forming a perimeter, maintaining order despite the chaos. At their center stood Ghost, directing, organizing, not destroying, containing. They're not rioting, Slade realized aloud. They're occupying. Ghost's influence, Davis confirmed. He's keeping Red and the more violent elements in check, for now. On another monitor, Warren and Boone moved through a corridor, gathering loyal guards as they went. Their destination was clear, the yard, where Ghost waited. If Warren reaches that yard, Lasky said, if he confronts Ghost directly, with all those inmates watching, the thought hung in the air, terrible in its implications. Slade made his decision. Davis, take a team. Intercept Warren before he reaches the yard. Detain him if necessary. Sir, with respect, most of the guards still see Warren as the authority here. Half of them might side with him. Then find the half that won't, Slade snapped. Because if Warren faces Ghost in that yard, with the media watching, with the whole world watching, he shook his head. Coldwater will burn. In the yard, beneath the harsh glare of security lights, Ghost moved among the inmates, his voice calm but carrying authority. Groups formed perimeters, secure but disciplined. No random violence, no destruction for its own sake. Red watched from the sidelines, his followers still loyal but waiting. The momentum had shifted, Ghost's vision of organized resistance proving more compelling than Red's call for vengeance. For now. They're sending negotiators, Ghost announced as Davis's radio transmission reached them. The warden wants terms. Red laughed bitterly. Terms? We have one term, Warren, delivered to us, for justice. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ghost raised his hand for silence. We demand more than that, he countered. Independent oversight of Coldwater, investigation into every abuse. Guards like Warren and Boone removed and prosecuted. Better conditions. Fair treatment. The things we're entitled to under the law. The yard fell silent as a door at the far end crashed open. Warren stood there, Boone at his side, a group of guards behind them. Their faces were hard, determined. Warren held a baton in one hand, slapping it rhythmically against his palm. Look who's playing politician, Warren called out, his voice echoing across the yard. Ghost, the great reformer. The inmates parted as Warren strode forward, his authority still evident despite his suspension, despite his disgrace. Ghost stood his ground, waiting. You think you've won something here? Warren continued, stopping a few yards from Ghost. You think this little demonstration changes anything? When the tactical team arrives, and they will arrive, you'll all be back in your cells, those who survive. Ghost's expression remained calm. It's over, Warren. The old Coldwater. Your Coldwater. It dies tonight. Warren's laugh was ugly. My Coldwater? I didn't build Coldwater, you idiot. I just maintained what was already here, the hierarchy, the violence, the control. He gestured to the inmates around them. You think this is the first uprising? The first time inmates thought they could change the system? There have been others. They all ended the same way. Not this time, Ghost replied. Because, this time, the world is watching. This time there's evidence. This time there are consequences. Warren's expression darkened. The only consequences tonight will be for you. He turned to Boone. Secure the ringleaders. Use whatever force necessary. Boone hesitated, looking at the hundreds of inmates surrounding them, at the growing uncertainty on the faces of his own men. I said move, Warren shouted. I wouldn't do that if I were you, a new voice called out. All eyes turned to see Lasky emerging from the same door Warren had used. Behind him stood Davis and several other guards, not Warren loyalists, but men who'd seen enough over the years to question the old order. Officer Lasky, Warren sneered. Come to join your inmate friends? I came to stop a massacre, Lasky replied. He addressed the guards behind Warren. The state tactical team is on its way. The media is outside. The Justice Department is involved. Whatever happens here tonight will be seen by the entire country. Some of the guards exchanged uneasy glances. Warren noticed, his control slipping. You're with me or against me? He snarled at his men. There's no middle ground here. There's always middle ground, Ghost interjected. That's what negotiation is, finding the space between extremes. Warren rounded on him, rage finally breaking through his control. You don't negotiate with inmates. You control them. Break them if necessary. Like you tried to break me? Ghost asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Every man in that yard had seen the video, had watched Warren's methodical brutality, had witnessed Ghost's silent endurance. You're nothing, Warren spat. You're an inmate, a number, a problem to be managed. I'm a man, Ghost replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. So is every person here. And that's what you never understood, Warren. We're not animals. We're not problems. We're men who made mistakes, who broke laws, who deserve punishment under those laws, but not torture, not humiliation, not the kind of justice you created. Warren's face contorted. With a roar of fury, he lunged at Ghost, baton raised. It happened so fast that few saw the actual sequence. Warren charging, Ghost sidestepping, Red appearing suddenly between them. The flash of metal, the splash of red on concrete. Warren stumbled back, clutching his side where Red's shank had sliced through his uniform. Not a killing blow, but a serious wound. Blood seeped between his fingers as he stared in shock. That's for every man you broke, Red snarled. Every life you destroyed. Boone rushed forward, but Davis and Lasky intercepted him, restraining him as chaos threatened to erupt. Ghost stepped between Red and Warren, facing the wounded sergeant. This stops now. No more blood, not even yours. He turned to the gathered inmates, voice rising above the growing commotion. We are not Warren. We are not Boone. We are not the violence they used against us. He pointed to the security cameras, to the prison walls beyond which media satellites transmitted every word. We are men demanding justice under the law. Show them that. Show them who we really are. A moment hung in the balance, rage versus restraint, vengeance versus justice. Then slowly the crowd stepped back. Red, shank still in hand, looked from Ghost to Warren, his expression conflicted. Give me the weapon, Red, Ghost said quietly. Show them we're better than this. For a long moment, Red stood frozen, the embodiment of 20 years of Coldwater's brutality, of systematic dehumanization, of rage without outlet. Then, with deliberate slowness, he handed the shank to Ghost. Warren, still bleeding, stared at the man he'd beaten, the man whose defiance had triggered his downfall. You think this changes anything, he managed, his voice weak but still venomous. You think they'll see you as equals now? As humans? Ghost looked at him with something close to pity. No. I think they'll see us as we are. Flawed. Broken in. Places. Capable of violence and rage. He glanced around at the inmates who'd chosen restraint over retribution, but also capable of mercy, of justice, of being more than what you made us. The distant sound of helicopters cut through the night, tactical teams arriving, media circling, the outside world descending on Coldwater. Ghost turned to Lasky. We have demands, real reforms, real accountability. Will you help us present them? Lasky nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. I will. As medics rushed to treat Warren as Boone was restrained, as the uprising shifted from occupation to negotiation, Ghost looked up at the prison searchlights, at the helicopters circling overhead, at the world that had suddenly turned its gaze to Coldwater. The system that Warren had built was crumbling. What would rise in its place remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Ghost allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Boone broke free from the guards holding him, shoving Davis against the wall with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. Before anyone could react, he grabbed Davis's radio, snarling into it. "All loyal officers, Warren's down. Code black, I repeat, code black." The yard erupted into chaos. Guards loyal to Warren and Boone drew their batons, forming a protective circle around the wounded sergeant. Inmates surged forward, some following, Ghost's calls for restraint, others giving in to years of repressed rage. Ghost grabbed Red's arm, pulling him back from the fray. "This isn't the plan," he shouted over the growing din. "We had them listening. We had them negotiating." Red's face was transformed, alight with a terrible purpose. "Plans change, Ghost. The time for talking is done." He turned to his closest followers. "We've got the yard. Now we take the rest." A group of about 20 inmates peeled away, following Red as he sprinted toward the administrative wing. Ghost watched them go, witnessing months of careful influence evaporate in seconds. "Ghost?" Lasky appeared at his side, face streaked with sweat. "We need to contain this. The tactical team is 10 minutes out. Once they arrive, it's a slaughter." Ghost finished. He surveyed the yard, making a rapid calculation. "Get your people, the guards who'll listen and secure the injured. Get Warren to the infirmary. And you?" Ghost's eyes fixed on the direction Red had gone. "I'm going to try to stop this before it's too late." Before Lasky could respond, an explosion rocked the north side of the prison. Orange flames licked skyward as black smoke billowed from what had been the prison commissary. The fire alarms wail joined the cacophony of shouts and screams. "Red," Ghost murmured. "Damn it, Red." Across the yard, Boone rallied his forces, about 15 guards armed with batons and tasers. Their expressions had shifted from enforcement to survival, from control to desperation. "Secure the armory," Boone ordered. "Then the control room. Anyone gets in your way, put them down. Hard." As his men moved out, Boone crouched beside Warren, who lay on a makeshift stretcher, face pale from blood loss. "Hang on, Sergeant, we're getting you to safety." Warren's glazed eyes fixed on Boone. "Don't let them win," he rasped. "Whatever it takes." Boone nodded, his expression hardening into something beyond duty, beyond even loyalty, something closer to fanaticism. "I won't, sir, I promise." Rising to his feet, Boone watched as medics carried Warren away. Then he turned toward the administrative wing where Red and his followers had gone, where Ghost had followed. "Whatever it takes," he repeated to himself, drawing his baton. In the central control room, Captain Henry Slade watched his prison disintegrate on a dozen monitors. The yard was still occupied, but now flames were visible from the north wing. The commissary, storage areas, even parts of the administrative section burned. Through the smoke and chaos, inmates and guards clashed in desperate struggles. "The tactical team is requesting permission to deploy tear gas," his communications officer reported. "They're standing by for full breach." Slade hesitated, weighing impossible options. Tactical teams were trained for maximum force. They would sweep through Coldwater with riot shields, batons, tear gas, rubber bullets. Anyone who resisted would be subdued. Violently. He'd seen it before, the injuries, the deaths, the official reports that never matched reality. "Sir?" the officer pressed. "They need an answer." Before Slade could respond, the door crashed. Open. Boone stood there, his uniform torn, blood, not his own, spattered across his face. "We're losing control," Boone said without preamble. "Red's people are torching the place block by block." "Where's Warren?" Slade demanded. "Infirmary. Stable for now." Boone moved to the monitors, scanning them rapidly. "We need lethal options, Captain. This is beyond riot control." Slade stared at him. "Lethal options? Are you out of your mind?" "They're killing us," Boone shouted. "Williams is dead, so is Ramirez. They were beaten to death in B block." He pointed to a monitor showing flames engulfing the commissary. "This isn't a riot anymore, it's an insurrection." Slade turned back to the communications officer. "Tell Tactical to stand by. No deployment without my direct order." "Sir," Boone protested. "Enough, Boone." Slade rounded on him. "Warren's methods brought us here. I won't compound the error by turning this into a massacre." Boone's expression shifted, something calculating replacing the desperate fury. "I understand, sir. I'll gather my men, establish a defensive perimeter around the infirmary." As Boone left, Slade felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spreading chaos. Something in Boone's sudden acquiescence felt wrong, dangerous. "Sir," the communications officer called. "There's activity at the main gate. Someone's trying to override the security protocols." Slade turned to the monitor showing the prison entrance. Through the grainy footage, he could make out a figure at the control panel, Officer Lasky. What the hell is he doing? Ghost moved through smoke-filled corridors, the sound of breaking glass and shouted orders echoing ahead of him. He'd tracked Red and his followers to the administrative wing, where they were systematically destroying offices, files, computers, anything connected to the system that had oppressed them. "Red," he called out, finally catching sight of his former ally amid the destruction. "This has to stop, now." Red turned, his face illuminated by the flames from a burning desk. Around him, his followers paused in their destruction. "Stop?" Red laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "We're just getting started, Ghost." He gestured at the burning office. "This is Coldwater's records room. Every disciplinary report, every abuse, every lie they told to keep us down, all of it burning away. And with it, any evidence that could have proven those abuses," Ghost countered. "Any documentation that might have helped change the system. You're not destroying the old order, Red. You're protecting it." For a moment, doubt flickered across Red's face. Then his expression hardened again. "Too little, too late, Ghost. We tried it your way. Peaceful resistance, negotiation." He spat the word like a curse. "And what did it get us? Warren bleeding but alive. Boone still in charge. The tactical team on its way to crush us. So your answer is to burn everything? Kill guards? Destroy any chance of real change?" "My answer is to make them fear us," Red snarled. "To show them that we're not just inmates to be controlled. We're a force to be reckoned with." A crash from further down the corridor interrupted them. Boone and his men had arrived, armed not just with batons now, but with riot shotguns loaded with rubber bullets and beanbag rounds. "Down!" Ghost shouted, tackling Red as the first volley of rubber bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing. Red's followers scattered, some taking cover, others charging Boone's position with makeshift weapons. The narrow corridor became a battlefield, the air thick with smoke, the crack of shotguns punctuating screams of rage and pain. Ghost pulled Red into an adjacent office. "There's a service corridor behind the records room," he said rapidly. "It leads to the east yard. We can still get out of this." Red peered around the doorframe, watching as Boone's men advanced, methodically firing at anything that moved. "And go where? Back to our cells? Back to the yard to wait for the tactical team? It's too late for retreat, Ghost. It's fight or die now." Ghost grabbed Red's shirt, forcing eye contact. "Listen to me. Boone's lost it. He's not trying to contain the riot anymore. He's trying to eliminate witnesses. Anyone who could testify against Warren, against him, against what they built here." Red's eyes narrowed. "All the more reason to fight. All the more reason to survive," Ghost countered. "To bear witness, to make sure the truth gets out." Outside, the sounds of combat grew closer. Boone's voice carried through the smoke. "Sweep each room. No survivors." Red looked from Ghost to the door, torn between survival and the destructive momentum he'd unleashed. Finally, he nodded. "The service corridor. But we're not running. We're regrouping." They made their way through the burning records room, ducking beneath a shattered window to reach a plain metal door marked "Maintenance Only." As Ghost eased it open, Red motioned to the few followers still within earshot, directing them to the escape route. "Maybe 8 of us left," Red muttered. "Out of 20. Ghost said nothing, leading the way into the dimly lit service corridor. Behind them, Boone's forces continued their advance, the sharp crack of shotguns punctuating the roar of the spreading fire. As they moved through the narrow passage, smoke seeping in through vents and door cracks, Ghost's mind raced. The situation had deteriorated beyond anything he'd anticipated. Red's violence, Boone's retaliation, the fires spreading through multiple sections. Coldwater was tearing itself apart. "Wait," Red hissed, grabbing Ghost's arm. "Someone's ahead." They froze, listening to shuffling footsteps in the darkness. A figure rounded the corner, stopping abruptly at the sight of them. It was Warren. His uniform was stained with blood, his face ashen from pain and blood loss. He clutched his wounded side with one hand, the other braced against the wall for support. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in a hatred so pure it seemed to transcend physical weakness. "You," he breathed, staring at Ghost. Red moved faster than thought, lunging forward with a makeshift shank. But Ghost was quicker, grabbing Red's arm, stopping the blade inches from Warren's throat. "Not like this," Ghost said, his voice low but firm. "We're better than him." Warren's laugh was a dry, terrible sound. "Better? You're animals. You always were." "If we're animals," Ghost replied, "it's because you tried to make us that way." He held Red back with one arm, facing the man who'd brutalized him. "But you failed, Warren. You didn't break us. You didn't make us like you." Warren's face contorted, a complex mix of rage, fear, and something else. Something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. "The difference between us," Ghost continued, "is that I could kill you right now. After everything you've done to me, to others, I'd be justified, but I won't, because unlike you, I can still choose who I want to be." For a long moment, the three men stood frozen in the smoky corridor, Ghost restraining Red, Warren sagging against the wall, their shared history suspended between them like a physical force. Then Warren straightened, his expression shifting to one of alarm as he looked past them. "Boone," he said, just as the sound of boots on metal flooring reached them. "Go," Ghost told Warren, making a split-second decision. "The East Yard is that way. Find Davis or Lasky, tell them what Boone is doing." Warren hesitated, clearly struggling with being indebted to the man he'd tortured. "Why would you help me?" "I'm not helping you," Ghost replied. "I'm helping the truth. Now go." As Warren disappeared down the corridor, Red wrenched free from Ghost's grip. "You let him walk? After everything?" "The enemy right now isn't Warren," Ghost said, already moving in the opposite direction. "It's Boone. And the fire. And the tactical team that's minutes away from turning this place into a killing field." Red followed, his expression troubled. "You still think there's a way out of this?" "There's always a way out," Ghost replied. "The question is what we're willing to sacrifice to find it." At the main gate, Ryan Lasky worked feverishly at the security panel, bypassing the lockdown protocols as Davis and a handful of guards loyal to him formed a protective cordon. "Hurry up," Davis urged, watching anxiously as smoke billowed from multiple sections of the prison. "Once Slade realizes what we're doing..." "Almost there," Lasky muttered, connecting the final bypass wire. The gate's indicator light shifted from red to green. With a grinding sound, the massive steel barrier began to slide open. Outside, a wall of reporters, cameramen, prison reform advocates, and concerned citizens surged forward. Behind them, tactical team members in full riot gear tried to establish a perimeter, momentarily confused by the unexpected opening of the gate. "Listen to me," Lasky shouted, holding up his hands as cameras turned toward him. "I'm Officer Ryan Lasky. I'm the one who leaked the footage of Sergeant Warren abusing inmate Caldwell. What you're seeing tonight isn't just a riot. It's the inevitable consequence of years of systematic abuse at Coldwater. The cameras crowded closer, reporters shouting questions, tactical team members pushing to reach him. Right now, Lasky continued, his voice gaining strength. Officer Travis Boone is leading a group of guards through the prison, using excessive force against inmates. There are fires in multiple sections. There are injured men, both inmates and officers, who need medical attention. Lasky! Slade's voice cut through the chaos. The warden pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Telling the truth, Lasky replied, turning to face his superior. The same truth I tried to tell when I leaked that footage. The same truth that everyone at Coldwater has known for years but was too afraid to say aloud. Slade's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he became aware of the dozens of cameras recording every word. This is not the way to address concerns about our facility, he said, his tone modulating to professional smoothness. Opening the gates during an active riot puts everyone at risk. The only ones at risk are the people trapped inside with Boone and his squad, Lasky countered. They're not trying to restore order, they're eliminating witnesses. A murmur ran through the assembled media. Slade's face paled. That's a serious accusation, Officer Lasky. Do you have any evidence of this? I do. The new voice came from behind them. Eli Warren stood in the gateway, his uniform blood-stained, his face haggard. The crowd fell silent at his appearance, recognizing the central figure from the viral video. Sergeant Warren? Slade asked, disbelief coloring his voice. You should be in the infirmary. Boone's gone rogue, Warren said, his voice carrying to the assembled cameras. He's using lethal force, targeting specific inmates, the ones who could testify against us. He swayed slightly, steadying himself against the gate. Against me. The admission hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity. Warren, the architect of Coldwater's brutal hierarchy, confirming what Lasky had claimed. And you're just now developing a conscience? Slade asked, skepticism evident. Warren's laugh was bitter. Conscience? No. But I know when a system is broken beyond repair. He looked at Lasky, something like respect in his eyes. Ghost was right. The truth matters more than power, more than control. Before Slade could respond, another explosion rocked the prison, this one from the west.
Wing.
Flames shot skyward, illuminating the night in hellish orange. The state tactical team needs to move in, Slade decided, turning to their commander. Secure the facility. Prioritize containment of Officer Boone's squad and evacuation of the wounded. And the inmates? Lasky pressed. Slade hesitated, then nodded. All personnel, staff and inmates alike, are to be treated as potential victims requiring evacuation. No excessive force. As the tactical team prepared to enter, Lasky caught sight of movement at the far end of the yard. Ghost emerged from a service door, Red and a small group of inmates following behind him. They moved cautiously, hands raised to show they weren't armed. Cameras swiveled toward them. Ghost's face, illuminated by the flames and searchlights, was a study in dignity amid chaos. He led his group slowly toward the gate, toward the watching world. In that moment, something shifted in the narrative of Coldwater. The image of Ghost, beaten by Warren days ago, now walking calmly through the burning prison he could have destroyed, spoke more powerfully than any testimony, any leaked video, any official report. As Ghost reached the gate, he stopped, facing the assembled media, the tactical team, the world watching through countless lenses. My name is Dante Caldwell, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. I've been at Coldwater for 7 years. What you see tonight isn't just about Warren or Boone or any individual. It's about a system that turned humans into animals, guards and inmates alike. He gestured to the burning prison behind him. Coldwater is more than a place. It's a mentality that says some people are less than human, that some deserve brutality in the name of control. That violence is justice. Red stepped forward to stand beside him, his earlier rage tempered by What they'd witnessed, what they'd survived. "We don't want destruction," he added, surprising even Ghost. "We want accountability. Real justice. The kind that heals instead of hardens." As tactical team members moved past them into the facility, Ghost's eyes found Lasky's. Something passed. Between them, recognition, respect, the shared understanding of men who'd chosen truth over safety. Behind them, Coldwater burned, not just the physical structure, but the system it represented, the hierarchy Warren had built, the dehumanization that had defined it for decades. And in the flames, the possibility of something new was born. Dawn broke over Coldwater in shades of gray and amber, sunlight filtering through the haze of smoke that still hung in the air. The night's fires had been contained but not completely extinguished. Rescue teams and breathing apparatus moved through, smoldering corridors searching for survivors. Outside the main gate, a makeshift triage center had been established. Ambulances arrived and departed in a steady rhythm, ferrying the injured, guards and inmates alike, to local hospitals. News vans lined the perimeter, their satellite dishes raised like strange mechanical flowers, broadcasting Coldwater's reckoning to the world. Ghost sat on the bumper of an ambulance, a thermal blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Paramedics had treated the burns on his hands, the cuts on his face, but there were other wounds, older, deeper, that no bandage could touch. Red sat beside him, handcuffed and under guard, his expression unreadable as he watched tactical team members escorting groups of inmates from the prison. Some went willingly, hands raised in surrender. Others had to be carried, overcome by smoke or injuries. "They're taking us to county," Red said quietly, "separating everyone involved in the uprising." Ghost nodded, unsurprised. "It was always going to end this way." "Was it?" Red's voice carried an edge. "You were right about one thing. We got their attention. But what happens when the cameras leave? When the public moves on to the next crisis? You think anything really changes?" Before Ghost could answer, a commotion near the gate drew their attention. A tactical team unit emerged, flanking a stretcher. On it lay Travis Boone, his chest a mess of blood and burned fabric, his face ashen, but eyes still alert, burning, with the same fanatical intensity that had driven him through the night. Behind the stretcher walked Officer Lasky, his uniform torn and bloodied, his face grim. Two tactical team members escorted him, their posture suggesting he was neither a colleague nor exactly a prisoner. "What happened?" Ghost asked as they passed. Lasky paused, looking from Ghost to Red, then to Boone on the stretcher. "We found him in the East Wing, setting more fires. He had a list. Names of inmates who'd witnessed Warren's abuses over the years. He was hunting them." Boone's laugh was wet, choked with blood. "Just finishing what Warren started?" His eyes fixed on Ghost with burning hatred. "Keeping the animals in their cages." "You're the one in a cage now," Red said, leaning forward despite his restraints. "How's it feel, being on the other side?" Boone's bloody smile widened. "Temporary setback. System always wins." His gaze shifted to Lasky. "Tell them what you did. Tell them how you crossed the line." Lasky's expression hardened. "We cornered him in the East Wing storage room. He had an inmate at gunpoint. Johnson, one of the men who'd filed complaints against Warren last year. When we ordered him to stand down, he fired instead. I returned fire." His eyes met Ghost's. "I did what I had to do." As paramedics wheeled Boone toward a waiting ambulance, he called back, his voice growing fainter. "You'll never be one of them, Lasky. You're a traitor to your own." When they were gone, Ghost studied Lasky's face, the exhaustion, the trauma, but also the certainty. The peace of a man who'd finally chosen a side and accepted the consequences. "Will you face charges?" Ghost asked. Lasky shrugged. "Maybe. Boone had a weapon, was threatening a life. But I also leaked classified security footage, opened the main gate during a riot, directly contradicted orders." A tired smile touched his lips. "Worth it, though." Ghost nodded. No words seemed adequate for what Lasky had risked, had sacrificed. "They're looking for you, by the way," Lasky added. "The investigators, and Warren. They've got him in a secure room in the administration building. What's left of it?" Red tensed beside Ghost. "Warren's still here? Not arrested?" "Under protective custody," Lasky explained. "Technically a victim of the riot after being stabbed, but also a key witness." Red spat on the ground. "Protective custody, of course, the system protects its own." Ghost rose, shedding the blanket. "Not this time." Lasky frowned. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Warren still hasn't faced the people he hurt most." Ghost's eyes moved to the administration building, visible through the gate. "The investigators want my testimony? They'll get it, but first Warren faces us, all of us." Lasky looked uncertain. "Ghost, don't throw away what you've accomplished. Violence now would—" "Not violence," Ghost interrupted. "Truth. In front of everyone. The cameras, the investigators, the world." He turned to the tactical team officer guarding Red. "We need to see Captain Slade. Now." Inside what remained of the administration building, Captain Henry Slade sat facing a panel of grim-faced officials: the governor's representative, Justice Department investigators, prison board members. The room, usually the setting for routine budget meetings and personnel reviews, now felt like a courtroom with Slade in the defendant's chair. "Let me be clear," Slade said, summoning every ounce of bureaucratic smoothness. "What happened last night was a tragedy, but not a failure of leadership. Sergeant Warren was already suspended and under investigation. Officer Boone acted without authorization. We were taking the appropriate steps to address systemic issues at Coldwater. The Justice Department lead, a severe woman named Chen, regarded him with professional skepticism. And yet, somehow, a suspended officer re-entered your facility during a riot. Somehow one of your guards led an armed suppression effort targeting specific inmates. Somehow your prison quite literally burned down while under your command." Slade felt sweat trickling down his back. "Extraordinary circumstances. Created by ordinary negligence," Chen finished for him. "By years of looking the other way, while Warren and others built a regime of abuse and racial intimidation." The door opened without a knock. A tactical team officer entered, followed by Ghost, Red, Lasky, and 3 other inmates. Older men who'd been at Coldwater for years, who'd endured the Warren era from its beginning. "What is the meaning of this?" Slade demanded, rising. "These inmates should be secured, processed. These men," Chen interrupted, "are key witnesses in our investigation, and they've requested an opportunity to address all parties directly." She gestured to empty chairs. "Please, gentlemen, sit." Slade's protests died on his lips as he recognized the shifting power dynamics in the room. He was no longer in control. Might never be again. Ghost remained standing as the others sat. His presence commanded attention, not through force, but through a quiet dignity that even his prison uniform couldn't diminish. "We're here to make a formal request," he began, addressing the panel. "Before we're transferred, before we're separated and silenced, before the media moves on, we want a public hearing, with Warren present, with cameras recording, where the men he abused can speak directly to him, and to the system that empowered him." Chen considered this. "That's highly unusual." "So is this situation," Ghost countered. "You have hundreds of witnesses, inmates, and guards all in one place. You have the media already assembled. You have Warren in custody. And you have us willing to testify, to share our experiences, to put faces and names to the abuses that happened at Coldwater. It would be irregular," the governor's representative acknowledged, "but potentially powerful. A public reckoning, transparency in real time." Slade saw his opportunity. "If I may suggest, such a hearing could serve multiple purposes. It would demonstrate our commitment to accountability while providing closure for all involved." Ghost's eyes narrowed at Slade's attempt to co-opt the narrative. "This isn't about closure, Captain. It's about justice. It's about making sure what happened at Coldwater never happens again. Not here, not anywhere." "Bring Warren here," Chen decided, and set up a video link to the media outside. If we're going to do this, let's do it properly. As officials rushed to comply, Slade approached Ghost, lowering his voice. You think this accomplishes anything? Warren faces some public humiliation, maybe criminal charges. But the system you're so eager to expose, it's bigger than Warren, bigger than Coldwater. It will absorb this setback and continue. Ghost met his gaze steadily. You're probably right. But now we've seen behind the curtain. We know the machinery can be stopped even briefly. Next time we'll aim higher. The implied threat hung between them as the door opened again. 2 tactical team members escorted Warren into the room. His uniform had been replaced with hospital scrubs, his side heavily bandaged where Red had stabbed him. His hands were cuffed, his expression a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. His eyes found Ghost immediately, anger flashing across his features. What is this? Some kind of show trial? No, Warren, Ghost replied. Just the truth, finally spoken aloud. As Warren was seated facing the assembled witnesses, a technician confirmed that video was being transmitted to screens set up outside the gate, where inmates, guards, media, and the public had gathered. Inside the room, a camera recorded everything, for posterity. Chen opened the proceedings. This informal hearing aims to gather testimony regarding practices at Coldwater Maximum Security Prison, specifically those implemented or overseen by Sergeant Eli Warren. She turned to Ghost. Mr. Caldwell, please begin. Ghost approached Warren, stopping just outside arm's reach. For a long moment, he simply looked at the man who had beaten him, humiliated him, tried to break him. The man who now sat handcuffed and wounded, stripped of authority, surrounded by the machinery of accountability. My name is Dante Caldwell, he began, his voice steady. I've been at Coldwater for 7 years, serving time for armed robbery. A crime I committed, a crime I've owned, a crime for which I was sentenced by a court of law. He gestured to Warren. But Sergeant Warren believed that sentence wasn't enough, that the law wasn't enough, that he needed to add his own punishment. Humiliation, beatings, psychological torture, not just for me, for any inmate who didn't show enough deference, especially if that inmate was black. Warren's jaw tightened. You had contraband in your cell. You resisted officers. A shank that your men planted, Ghost countered, as they did countless times to justify beatings, to justify solitary confinement, to justify breaking men who wouldn't be broken by conventional means. One by one, the other inmates rose to speak. Johnson described being denied medical treatment after a beating, left in solitary with broken ribs. Williams recounted racial slurs used routinely by Warren and his followers. Davis spoke of guards placing bets on which inmates would break first under Warren's special attention. Warren sat in rigid silence, his expression fluctuating between anger and discomfort as the testimony mounted. When Red's turn came, Warren visibly tensed. Unlike Ghost, I didn't always keep my cool. Red admitted, his characteristic bravado subdued. I fought back. I made trouble. And Warren made sure I paid for every infraction, real or invented. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a lattice of scars on his forearm. Cigarette burns, a greeting from Boone on Warren's orders, after I filed a complaint about guard conduct. Warren leaned forward. You were a known instigator, a gang leader inside Coldwater. I became what you made. Me, Red replied. We all did. That's the point, Warren. Your system didn't create order. It created monsters, on both sides of the bars. As testimony continued, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, charged with years of pain finally given voice. Outside, via the video feed, a silent crowd watched. Inmates, guards, reporters, citizens, witnesses to a reckoning decades in the making. Finally, Ghost turned to Lasky. There's one more voice that needs to be heard. The one who risked everything to expose the truth. Lasky stood, facing not just Warren but Slade and the officials. I joined Coldwater 3 weeks ago. Before that, I was in the academy, where they taught us about rehabilitation, about the role of corrections in public safety. His voice carried the weight of profound disillusionment. My first day at Coldwater, I watched Warren beat an inmate for looking him in the eye. My second day, I watched him plant contraband to justify another beating. By the third day, I understood that Coldwater wasn't about rehabilitation or even punishment. It was about power. Raw, unaccountable power. He turned directly to Warren. I leaked that footage because the system designed to prevent abuses like yours had failed, had been complicit, had turned away when it should have been watching. Warren's facade finally cracked. You self-righteous little... He lunged forward despite his restraints, only to be held back by tactical team members. You have no idea what it takes to control men like these, no idea what's necessary. That's just it, Warren, Ghost interjected. We're men, not animals to be controlled, not problems to be managed, men. With rights, with dignity, with humanity, no matter what we've done. Warren's laugh was bitter. Dignity? Humanity? Look around you, Caldwell. Look at what your people did to my prison last night. How many injured? How much destruction? That's the reality when control slips. That's what happens when the animals run free. No, Ghost said quietly. That's what happens when the animals run the zoo. He looked to the panel of officials. Last night was the inevitable result of Warren's system. The explosion after years of pressure, the wound after years of infection. Don't blame the symptoms, cure the disease. Chen nodded, her expression grave. Mr. Caldwell makes a compelling point. What we've heard today suggests a pattern of abuse far beyond individual incidents, a culture of violence and racial intimidation that permeated every aspect of Coldwater's operation. Warren's expression shifted, a dawning realization that he had lost control not just of Coldwater but of the narrative, that he was no longer the authority, the judge, the power, that he was, for the first time in decades, accountable. You're going to take the word of convicted criminals over a 20-year veteran officer? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. We're going to follow the evidence, Chen replied. The testimony, the video footage, the documentation, the truth, however uncomfortable. Ghost stepped back, regarding Warren with something almost like pity. That's the difference between justice and vengeance, Warren. Justice looks at all sides, considers all voices, weighs all evidence. It doesn't start with the conclusion and work backward. As the hearing concluded, Ghost approached Warren one final time. The room had emptied except for tactical team guards, the two men face to face in a moment that seemed both private and, through the still recording cameras, universally witnessed. I could hate you, Ghost said quietly. After everything you've done, I would be justified. But hate is a chain, Warren. It binds the hater as surely as the hated. Warren's expression was complex. Anger, confusion, and something that might have been the first glimmer of introspection. So what? You forgive me? Is that what this little speech is about? No, Ghost replied. Forgiveness is earned through repentance, through change. This is about liberation. My liberation from the power you thought you had over me. Over all of us. He turned to leave, but Warren's voice stopped him. They'll separate you now. Send you to different facilities. Your little moment of influence. It's already ending. Ghost looked back, a small smile touching his lips. Maybe. But the truth we spoke today, that lives on. And the next Warren at the next Coldwater, he'll know we're watching. They'll all know. Outside in the harsh light of day, Ghost rejoined Red and the others. Tactical team members waited to escort them to transport vehicles, to separate facilities across the state. The uprising was over, the physical battle lost. But as cameras continued to record, as reporters rushed forward with questions, as the world's attention remained fixed on Coldwater's smoking ruins, Ghost knew that the larger war, the one for recognition, for humanity, for justice, had just begun. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt something beyond survival, beyond resistance, something like hope. 3 months after the uprising, Ghost sat in an unfamiliar visitation room at Eastern State Correctional, 200 miles from Coldwater's smoldering ruins. The table was wooden, not metal. The windows had no bars, just reinforced glass that let in the autumn sunlight. Guards stood at a respectful distance, not hovering at his shoulder. Small changes. Symbolic, perhaps. But symbols mattered. The door opened, and a woman in a tailored suit entered, carrying a leather portfolio. Maya Chen, lead investigator from the Justice Department, now appointed to oversee the reformation of the state's prison system. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted him, sitting across the table. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Ghost nodded, studying, her face for clues about this unexpected visit. "Not like I had many other appointments." A small smile touched Chen's lips. "How are you settling in here?" "Different place, same walls." Ghost leaned back, his posture relaxed but alert. "But I'm guessing you didn't drive 3 hours to check on my comfort." "No." Chen opened her portfolio, removing several newspaper clippings. She spread them across the table. Headlines about Coldwater, about Warren, about the systemic failures revealed in the aftermath. "Coldwater's been officially decommissioned," she said. "Too damaged to salvage, structurally and symbolically. The governor has announced plans to build a new facility, designed around rehabilitation rather than punishment." Ghost's expression remained neutral. "And you believe that?" "I believe in verification," Chen replied, "which is why I've been appointed to oversee the process, to ensure the new facility isn't just Coldwater with a fresh coat of paint." She pushed forward another document, official letterhead, multiple signatures. "The state has also agreed to review the cases of every inmate who filed complaints against Warren or his officers, to examine sentencing disparities, particularly those with racial components." Ghost picked up the document, scanning its contents. His own name appeared on the list of cases to be prioritized for review. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because the system failed," Chen answered. "Not just at Coldwater, but at every level. Failed to monitor, failed to intervene, failed to hear the voices of those inside." She met his gaze directly. "And because of you, the testimony you organized, the way you handled the uprising, you've become a symbol, Mr. Caldwell, a face for reform." Ghost set the document down carefully. Symbols can be co-opted, used to whitewash deeper problems. "They can," Chen agreed, "unless they remain active, unless they continue to speak truth to power." She slid a final document across the table, different from the others, smaller, more official looking. "Your sentence review has been expedited. Based on new evidence, testimony from multiple witnesses about Warren's targeting of you and your actions during the uprising, actions that saved lives, the board has recommended clemency. The governor has agreed." Ghost stared at the paper, unable to fully process the words printed there. "Clemency?" he repeated, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. "You'd be released within 30 days, Chen explained, with certain conditions, regular check-ins, continuation of your educational programs, and—" She hesitated. "A request that you consider serving as a consultant to the Prison Reform Commission. Your perspective would be invaluable as we redesign, not just the physical structure, but the philosophy behind incarceration in this state." Ghost sat in silence, the weight of possibility pressing on him for the first time in 7 years. Freedom, purpose, a platform. "And if I refuse?" he finally asked. "The clemency stands regardless," Chen assured him. "This isn't a quid pro quo. It's an opportunity for you and for a system that needs to change." Ghost nodded slowly, mind already calculating this new landscape. "I'll need time to consider." "Of course." Chen gathered her documents, leaving only the clemency notification. "Oh, and there's someone else who wanted to see you, if you're willing." Before Ghost could respond, the door opened again. Ryan Lasky entered, no longer in a guard's uniform but dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, a light jacket. He looked younger somehow, the weight of Coldwater lifted from his shoulders. Chen excused herself, leaving the two men alone. For a moment neither spoke, the shared trauma of Coldwater hanging between them like an invisible thread. "You look different," Ghost finally said. Lasky smiled faintly. "Feels different, being on the outside. I heard you resigned." more like a mutual parting of ways. Lasky sat in the chair Chen had vacated. I'm working with a prison reform advocacy group now, testifying about what I saw at Coldwater, what I was trained to ignore, what became normal. Ghost studied the former guard, seeing not an opponent now, but an ally forged in the crucible of shared truth. And Warren? Boone? Warren's trial starts next month. Multiple charges. Civil rights violations, assault, conspiracy. He's being held in protective custody, ironically enough. Lasky's expression darkened. Boone died 2 days after the uprising. Complications from his wounds. Ghost absorbed, this feeling neither satisfaction nor regret at Boone's fate, just the grim acknowledgement that violence begot violence in an endless cycle, one that he had tried to break. And the others? From Coldwater? Inmates have been redistributed to facilities across the state. Guards too. Lasky hesitated. Red was classified as a security risk. He's in maximum lockdown at Western State. This wasn't surprising, but Ghost felt a pang of regret for his former ally. Red had been shaped by Coldwater just as surely as any of them, his rage a natural response to years of degradation. In another life, with different choices, different treatment, Red might have been a leader of a different kind. Chen offered me clemency, Ghost said, watching Lasky's reaction, and a position with the Reform Commission. Lasky's eyebrows raised. Are you going to take it? The clemency or the position? Both. Ghost looked out the window, considering. Freedom beckoned, the simple pleasure of walking down a street, of choosing his own meals, of existing beyond walls and schedules, and constant surveillance. But freedom to what end? To disappear into anonymity? To put Coldwater behind him? I spent 7 years learning how the system works from the inside, he said slowly. Learning its weaknesses, its blind spots, what it hides and what it reveals. He turned back to Lasky. Seems like knowledge that shouldn't go to waste. Lasky nodded, understanding. The battle doesn't end just because Coldwater fell. It was never about Coldwater, Ghost replied, or Warren. It was about the structures that created them, that allowed them to exist, that will create new Warrens, new Coldwaters, unless something fundamental changes. And you think you can change it? Ghost smiled slightly. Not alone, but as part of something larger? Maybe. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two men from opposite sides of a divide, now aligned in purpose, if not in experience. There's something else you should know, Lasky said finally. Slade wasn't just fired, he's under investigation too. Evidence emerged that he actively covered up complaints against Warren for years, buried reports, transferred inmates who spoke out. No surprise there, Ghost commented. Slade always valued order over justice. The thing is, Lasky continued, in trying to save himself, he's implicating others. Higher-ups who knew about Coldwater's conditions but did nothing. Politicians who benefited from the tough-on-crime optics while ignoring the reality. It's spreading beyond Coldwater, beyond even the prison system. Ghost considered this, the ripples expanding outward from what had begun as one leaked video, one moment of defiance. Good, he said simply. 2 weeks later, in a different visitation room, Ghost sat across from a different visitor. Red sat heavily in the chair, orange jumpsuit bright against his dark skin, hands and feet shackled. Western State took no chances, with inmates labeled as security risks. They told me you asked to see me, Red said, suspicious. Why? Ghost studied his former ally, noting the new hardness in his eyes, the tension in his posture. Western State was already leaving its mark. I'm getting out, Ghost said without preamble. Clemency, 30 days. Red's expression flickered. Surprise, then a flash of something like betrayal, quickly masked by a hard smile. Good for you, the hero gets his reward. It's not a reward, Red. It's an opportunity. To do what? Forget? Move on? Leave the rest of us behind? Ghost leaned forward. To keep fighting. From the outside this time. With resources. With a voice they have to listen to. Red's laugh was bitter. They don't have to listen to anything. They'll parade you around for a while, their model reformed criminal. Then, when the cameras move on, when Coldwater becomes yesterday's news, they'll sideline you, and everything goes back to how it was. Maybe, Ghost acknowledged. Or maybe not. Either way, I'll be in a position to do more than I can from in here. Red studied him, calculating as always. And what about me? The violent offender? The unrepentant rebel? You think they're going to offer me clemency? No, Ghost admitted. Not now. Maybe not ever. But your case will be reviewed like the others. And I'll make sure they know the full context of your actions. The full history. That I was provoked, pushed, made into this. Red's voice rose slightly, drawing a warning look from the guards. He lowered it again. You think that changes anything for them? They need their monsters, Ghost. Their justification for all this. He gestured to the walls around them. Ghost nodded, understanding Red's perspective all too well. I know. The system needs its enemies. Its examples of why control is necessary. He held Red's gaze. Don't give them what they expect. Don't become what Warren tried to make you. Red's expression hardened. Easy for you to say, from the outside. I won't forget where I came from, Red. Or who stood with me when it mattered. Ghost spoke with quiet intensity. This isn't over. Not for any of us. Something shifted in Red's eyes. Not exactly hope, but perhaps the shadow of it. The possibility that the world might not be as fixed, as immutable, as Coldwater had tried to teach them. We'll see, Red said finally. We'll see what kind of man you are on the outside. On his last night at Eastern State, Ghost stood at the window of his cell, looking out at stars partially obscured by security lights and razor wire. Tomorrow, he would walk through gates not as an inmate being transferred, but as a free man. A man with choices, with possibilities and with responsibilities to those still inside, to the truth he'd helped expose, to the change he'd helped ignite. A guard appeared at his cell door, Davis, transferred from Coldwater like so many others. You've got a call, Caldwell. Warden approved it. Ghost followed Davis to the phone. Room, curious. Late-night calls were unusual, especially for an inmate about to be released. The voice on the line was familiar, though diminished somehow. Eli Warren. Caldwell, Warren said, his tone unreadable. I heard about your clemency. Ghost said nothing, waiting. My trial starts next week, Warren continued. They're bringing in inmates from all over the state to testify, men I haven't seen in years. Still, Ghost remained silent. I wanted to ask. Warren's voice faltered, then strengthened again. Will you be there? To witness? The question hung between them, weighted with history, with pain, with the strange, twisted connection that had bound them together. Yes, Ghost answered simply. I'll be there. Warren exhaled audibly. Good. That's good. Why does it matter to you? Ghost asked, genuinely curious. A long pause. Because you saw me. Really saw me. Not just what I did, but why. The system I was part of. The role I played. Warren's voice grew quieter. If there's judgment coming, I want it to be complete. I want it to see all of me. Justice, not vengeance, Ghost said, echoing his own words from the yard that night. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes, Warren replied. Maybe they have to be. After the call ended, Ghost remained in the phone room, thinking about Warren's words, about justice and vengeance, about seeing and being seen, about systems, and the individuals within them. Tomorrow he would step outside as Dante Caldwell, free man, advocate, symbol, no longer defined by Coldwater, by his inmate number, by the labels attached to him by a system designed to dehumanize. But he would carry Coldwater with him, not as a weight, but as knowledge, as perspective, as purpose. 30 days later, Ghost stood on a hill overlooking what had once been Coldwater Maximum Security Prison. The buildings remained, scarred, by fire, surrounded by construction equipment. Demolition would begin tomorrow, the first step toward building something new in its place. Beside him stood Lasky, hands in his pockets against the autumn chill. Hard to believe it's really going to be gone. The buildings will be gone, Ghost corrected. Coldwater was never just concrete and steel. Lasky nodded, understanding. The real work is just beginning, isn't it? It always is. Ghost turned from the prison to face the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. But for the first time, it feels possible. Below them, at the base of the hill, a small group had gathered. Former inmates released or transferred after the uprising, now returning to witness Coldwater's final chapter. Among them were advocates, journalists, family members, all part of the growing movement inspired by what had happened here. Ghost looked at their faces upturned toward him, waiting for words, for guidance, for the next step in a journey that had begun in violence but might, with vigilance and courage, end in transformation. Coldwater falls tomorrow, he called down to them, his voice carrying on the clear air. But that's just the beginning. The real Coldwater, the one that lived in policies and prejudices, in silence and complacency, that's what we're really here to demolish. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Some of us were inmates. Some were guards. Some are family members who watched loved ones disappear into a system designed to break them. Some are citizens who turned away because it was easier not to see. Ghost gestured to the prison behind him. But all of us are witnesses now. All of us carry the truth of what happened here. And all of us have a responsibility to make sure it never happens again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across what remained of Coldwater, Ghost felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but a turning point. The monster had been named. The darkness exposed to light. The work of building something better could now begin. And for the first time since he'd entered Coldwater 7 years ago, Dante, Ghost Caldwell, allowed himself to feel not just hope, but certainty. The certainty that while systems were powerful, people were more so. That while change was difficult, it was never impossible. That while justice might be delayed, with enough voices demanding it, it could never be permanently denied. Behind him, Coldwater waited for its final judgment. Before him stretched a future unnamed, unclaimed, full of possibility. Ghost took a step forward, away from the prison, toward what came next. The first step of many. The battle wasn't over, might never be truly over, but for the first time the fight wasn't just his. And in that knowledge there was freedom beyond any prison wall. Up next we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.